Adding motion blur to your camera movement in Cavalry can be a bit tricky. Here are two ways to add motion blur to your camera movement. I have these 3 text blocks and I would like my camera to move from one to the next. We're using the camera tool inside of Cavalry. There are 2 2D cameras, the freeform and the guide. The guide is a bit easier to work with, but that doesn't support motion blur. The freeform camera does support motion blur in a limited way. For this to work, you first have to set the 2.5D layer active here. Then let's go into our zoom and move this to the left and up. Set a keyframe for our position. Let's move to the second block. And now it doesn't really matter if you enable motion blur, I'll just enable it to show you. If I'm going over here, for example, and set the motion blur to full, nothing is happening, but the transform only does work. So we can set the transform only for both our text and background shape here. And now we get a basic motion blur effect. And this is independent from the motion blur setting here, and also independent from our motion blur settings here. So as you can see, the motion blur effect isn't very clean. We can really see the duplicates of the text block here. With full motion blur, you can increase the sample rate, but with the transform only, that doesn't make a difference. So this can work, but if you need cleaner motion blur, there's a way to use the full motion blur. Let's just delete this camera. And that's by using a separate composition. So I'm going to go in new composition, open this, drag in my first composition, and we're going to use the scale and position of our composition as a camera movement. So I'm going to increase the scale, and then moving it around is actually pretty easy because we can just click and drag in the viewport, set a keyframe, go to my second block, again set some keyframes, and then go to the third block. Now let's go into our settings here, go to our motion blur. Of course, we can still use the transform only here, but we can also use the full motion blur now. And as you can see, this is a lot cleaner, and it also allows you to change the motion blur settings. So even if it's not clean, you can simply increase the sample rate and get a very clean motion blur. So let's add some easing here. And there you go. One other advantage of using a separate composition is that we can now do some compositing here on this composition. So we can, for example, do some color correction by going to the filters and use the HSV adjustment. Now I can go in and, for example, change the hue for the entire scene, or even animate it in the transitions. So, for example, set the hue here to 0 and then change it to a different hue. Of course, you could also do that in your original composition, but sometimes this is a quicker, easier way to make some color adjustments.